My name is Patricia Murphy, and I'm 41 years old. Last week at my parents' dinner table, my younger sister put her face in her hands and sobbed that I was jealous, heartless, that only a monster would doubt a dying woman. She can't even let me have peace, Shannon wept, and my mother rushed to hold her, and my father looked at me like I'd struck a child. I'm sick, Patty, I'm dying. And all you've ever done is resent me for it. Around that table sat the people I love most, and every one of them looked at me with disgust. Because for 9 months, my family had emptied their savings. $200,000, the whole retirement, the house cushion, all of it, into my sister's cancer treatments and her last wishes. And somewhere in those 9 months, they had quietly made a rule. No one was allowed to ask questions. Questions were cruelty. Questions were jealousy. Questions were what Patty did, because Patty had always been jealous of her baby sister. I didn't argue. I've spent 41 years learning that arguing with the family's version of Shannon is like arguing with the tide. I just reached into my bag, took out a folder, and slid it across the table to her. She flipped it open, and the second she saw the logo on page 1, before she read a single word, before she got to any of the rest of it, she shot straight up out of her chair because she knew that logo. She knew exactly what it meant. And she knew in that instant that I knew too. Before I go any further, if you've ever been called heartless for telling a truth nobody wanted to hear, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps this story reach the people who need it. And drop your city and the time where you're listening from in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel at night. I'm Patricia. This is the story of a sister's illness, a family that banned every question, and the one page that made her stand up before she'd even read it. To understand the folder, you have to understand that I'm a nurse, and that I spent 9 months calling myself a monster for knowing something I couldn't unknow. I've been a nurse for 18 years. I say that first because it's the center of everything that happened, and because it's the thing that made my private hell so much worse than it had to be. When your sister tells the family she has cancer, most people get to simply believe her. They get to be afraid and sad and supportive, and they never once have to wonder. They don't have the training to wonder. I did. I work in a hospital in Columbus. I've held the hands of more dying people than I can count. I know what cancer treatment actually looks like. Not the movie version, the real one. I know the names of the drugs. I know what they do to a body, what the side effects actually are, what the schedule of it looks like, the way a person's life gets organized around infusion appointments and blood counts and the particular exhaustion that no one who hasn't seen it up close can fake convincingly. And from almost the very beginning, something my sister said didn't fit. It started small. Shannon would mention a drug, and it would be the wrong drug for the cancer she said she had. She'd describe a side effect that doesn't go with the treatment she claimed to be on. She'd talk about her chemo schedule in a way that no actual oncology patient talks, because real patients learn the rhythm of it in their bones. And she was describing it like someone who'd read about it online. Once she told the family her white count was through the roof from all the chemo, and I sat there with my fork halfway to my mouth, Because chemotherapy drives your white count down. That's the whole danger of it. That's why patients get neutropenic and end up hospitalized from a common cold. Up is the opposite of what happens. Any nurse would know, any nurse would freeze, fork in the air the way I did. There were more. So many more. Once I started, against my own will, keeping a private tally. She said she was on a chemotherapy that causes severe hair loss, and her hair was thick and shining. I told myself about cold caps, about the patients who keep their hair. I built her an excuse out of my own knowledge. She described a port for her infusions, but touched the wrong side of her chest when she gestured at it, and touched it without the small wince every port patient has in the early weeks. She talked about radiation and chemo happening in the same week in a combination that, for her supposed diagnosis, no oncologist would order. She said she'd had a biopsy that came back in a few hours, when biopsies take days. Each one alone was nothing. A layperson's slip, a detail garbled in translation between her and my parents. But I wasn't a layperson. I'd spent 18 years steeped in exactly this, and the errors didn't behave like the honest confusion of a frightened sick person. They behaved like the errors of someone improvising a part she hadn't fully researched, confident no one in the audience knew the script. The worst part was that I was the one person in that audience who did, and every instinct I had, the trained instincts that made me good at my job, the instincts that had caught a deteriorating patient 100 times before a doctor did. All of them were screaming, and I had been raised to treat my own screaming instincts as the symptom of a character flaw. I told myself I was wrong. I told myself she'd misremembered, that the family had garbled the details, that I was being exactly the thing they'd always accused me of being, the jealous one, the cold one, the big sister who couldn't stand that the baby got all the attention. I told myself a monster would notice these things. So I swallowed it. For months, I swallowed it. That's the part I need you to understand before I tell you the rest. I didn't go looking. I am a nurse, and the truth came looking for me in the wrong names of drugs across my parents' dinner table. And I spent months calling myself Heartless for hearing it. To understand why the whole family believed Shannon over the nurse in the family, you have to understand how we were raised. Shannon is 5 years younger than me, and from the day she was born, she was the delicate one. She was a sickly baby, in and out of the pediatrician, and my parents organized the entire household around her fragility. I became, at 5 years old, the strong one, the helper, the big girl who didn't need fussing because all the fussing was already spoken for. It's a role you don't choose and can't quit. Shannon was the one things happened to, and I was the one who helped. Shannon got cared for. I did the caring. When she cried, the whole house moved. When I cried, I was told to set a good example. By the time we were teenagers, it was simply the architecture of the family, invisible to everyone inside it. Shannon is precious and breakable. Patricia is sturdy and fine. I have a specific memory that holds the whole thing. I was 12, Shannon was 7, and I'd fallen off my bike and split my knee open. A real injury. The kind that needed stitches, blood running into my sock. I walked home holding it together, literally holding the skin together with my fingers. Because that's who I was, the one who handled things. And when I came through the door, my mother's first reaction wasn't to look at my knee. It was to say, "Oh, Patty, not now. Your sister's having one of her bad days. Can you clean that up yourself?" Shannon's bad day was a tantrum about a canceled play date. I cleaned my knee up myself in the bathroom at 12, and I have the scar to this day. And I learned the lesson that scar taught. In this family, your real blood waits behind Shannon's imaginary crises. I think about that scar a lot now. I think Shannon learned a lesson that same day, watching from the couch, that a bad day, performed loudly enough, summons the whole household, while a sister's actual bleeding gets sent to the bathroom to handle itself. And here's the cruel little engine at the center of it. Because I was the strong one, my needs were always slightly suspect. If I wanted something Shannon had, I was being jealous. If I pointed out that Shannon got away with things I never could, I was being bitter. The word jealous got attached to me young, and it stuck, and it became the all-purpose explanation for any time I failed to fall in line behind my sister. Patty's just jealous. She's always been jealous of Shannon. I think I became a nurse partly to finally be the one who knew something. In a family where my perception was always the suspect one, I chose a profession built on knowing, on training, on facts, on the body telling you the truth, whether anyone believes you or not. A fever is a fever, no matter who's jealous. A white count is a number. I built a whole career in a place where what I knew couldn't be waved away as feelings. And then my sister announced she was dying and described it wrong. And I discovered that even 18 years of training couldn't save me from the oldest rule in my family. When Patricia knows something inconvenient about Shannon, Patricia is just jealous. The announcement came in April, about 9 months before that dinner. Shannon called a family meeting, which was already unusual. She sat in our parents' living room, pale. She'd done something to look pale, I realize now, but at the time it just frightened me, and told us she'd been diagnosed with a rare aggressive cancer, stage 4, that the standard treatments wouldn't be enough, that there was an experimental program, very expensive, not covered by insurance, that was her only real chance. The room dissolved. My mother wept. My father held Shannon like she was 6 years old again. And I want to be honest about this, I cried too. Because in that moment I didn't know yet. In that moment she was my baby sister and she was dying. And every wrong detail was still in the future, and I loved her. And I was terrified. That's the thing people misunderstand when they hear this story. They imagine I was suspicious from the start, arms crossed, cold. I wasn't. I was the first one offering to help. I offered to go with her to appointments. "I'm a nurse," I said. "Let me come. Let me talk to your oncologist. Let me help you understand your options." It's the most natural offer in the world from a sister who works in medicine. I meant it with my whole heart. In those first weeks, I reorganized my life around her. I read everything I could find about aggressive cancers, staying up late on my nights off, trying to understand what she was facing so I could be useful, so I could translate the doctor speak for our parents, so I could be the family's medical advocate, the way nurses so often become for the people they love. I made a folder, even then, a hopeful folder, full of treatment options and questions to ask and support resources. I brought it to her, proud, ready to be the big sister who finally got to protect the little one with something real. Shannon turned me down, gently, tearfully, but firmly. She didn't want me at her appointments. She said it would be too much pressure to have me there analyzing everything. She said my medical brain would make her feel like a patient instead of a person. My mother backed her up. Let her do this her way, Patty. Don't make it about you. She didn't want my hopeful folder either. She set it aside, unopened, and something flickered across her face when she looked at it. I read it then as a dying woman's despair at all those treatment options. I understand now it was the look of a liar being handed a folder by the one person in the family who could read the words inside it. At the time, it broke my heart. I thought my own sister didn't want me near her in her dying. Now I understand it was the first brick in the wall. A real patient would have wanted the nurse sister at her appointments, would have clung to having family in the room who spoke the language, who could catch a mistake, who could ask the doctor the questions a frightened patient forgets. The one thing Shannon could not allow, ever, was me in the same room as an actual oncologist, an actual chart, an actual treatment. She had to keep medicine and family in two separate rooms because she was the only door between them, and the whole scheme depended on no one else ever walking through. So she went to her appointments alone, and she came back with stories, and the money started to move. The money is the part that still takes my breath away, even now. My parents are not wealthy people. They're careful, Midwestern, retire with a paid-off house people. Over a lifetime of work, they had built up a little over $200,000. Retirement savings, a home equity cushion, the careful nest egg of people who lived below their means for 40 years. Over 9 months, they gave all of it to Shannon. It came in waves, each one with a story. The experimental treatment required an upfront payment the insurance wouldn't cover. Then there were travel costs for a specialist in another state. Then a clinical trial enrollment fee, which should have been my second giant red flag, because legitimate clinical trials don't charge patients to enroll. They're studies. They pay for you. Then came the last wishes phase, which is the part that makes me coldest. Once everyone believed she was terminal, Shannon began talking about the things she wanted to do before the end. A trip, experiences, memories to leave behind. And my parents, who could deny their dying daughter nothing, paid for all of it and called it love. I watched it happen in real time, helpless, gagged by the rule. I watched my father, 70 years old, a man who'd worked with his hands his whole life and was finally, barely, comfortable, sit at his kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of statements, and talk about going back to work part-time. I watched my mother quietly cancel her own small joys. The cleaning lady who came twice a month and helped her aging back. The modest cruise she and Dad had been saving toward for a decade. The dinners out. They moved money out of retirement accounts, paying penalties to do it because their daughter was dying. And what is a tax penalty against a daughter's life? They borrowed against the house they'd spent 30 years paying off. Every withdrawal aged them a little. I could see it happening to their faces across those 9 months. The particular gray exhaustion of people giving away their own safety, one wire transfer at a time. And every time I felt the question rising in my throat, where exactly is this money going? What is the name of this trial? Who is the doctor? I looked at my sister's pale face, and I shoved the question back down, and I hated myself for having it. Do you understand what that does to a person? To watch the people you love hand away everything they have, to suspect with growing certainty that it's a lie, and to be told that the suspicion itself makes you a monster? I went to work and held dying patients' hands, real ones, actually dying, and came home to a fake one bleeding my parents dry, and I was the villain. Some nights, I could hardly breathe with it, because by then the rule was in place. It happened in November. I'd asked Shannon, as gently as I knew how, just one careful question about her treatment. The name of the protocol, I think, something I could look up, something a nurse would naturally ask. And Shannon's face crumpled, and she cried. And my mother turned on me with a fury I'd never seen. How dare you interrogate your dying sister? How dare you? Do you know what she's going through while you sit there playing detective? This is your jealousy, Patricia. This is who you've always been. I will not have it. No one in this family is going to put that girl through a cross-examination in her final months. The questions stop. Do you hear me? The questions stop. I remember how quiet the room got after, and how everyone's eyes went to their plates, and how Shannon, through her tears, looked at me over our mother's shoulder with an expression no one else caught. Not grief, not hurt. Something closer to satisfaction. The look of someone who has just watched a threat be neutralized. I told myself I imagined it. I'd been telling myself I imagined things my whole life. But I didn't imagine it. For 1/2 second, before the tears came back, my dying sister looked at me like a chess player who'd just taken a piece, and everyone nodded. My father, my aunt, everyone. The question stopped. The rule was law now, and I was its designated criminal. The jealous sister on permanent probation who had proven she couldn't be trusted not to wound a dying woman with her questions. After that night, I couldn't even ask Shannon how she was feeling without my mother watching me for signs of an attack. I had been turned completely into the family's villain. And the genius of it was that the more right I turned out to be, the more it would look like I'd been hunting her all along. That was the moment the wall was finished. From then on, asking anything was an act of cruelty against a dying woman. The family had been sealed shut around a story, and I, the nurse, the one person trained to know it was wrong, had been cast officially as the villain for noticing. For a few weeks after that, I genuinely tried to make myself believe. I want you to know that because it matters. I didn't go straight to suspicion. I went to shame. I lay awake at night thinking maybe my mother was right. Maybe I was jealous. Maybe 18 years of being the disbelieved one had curdled into something ugly in me. Maybe I was inventing wrongness in my dying sister's words because some sick part of me couldn't stand that she was finally, tragically, the center of everything for a reason even I couldn't argue with. I talked to my husband, Tom, about it, late at night, in the dark, where it felt safe to say the unsayable. And Tom, who is a quiet, steady man, and who has watched me work in medicine for our entire marriage, said the thing that finally let me stop hating myself. He said, "Patty, you've spent 18 years knowing things about sick people. You've never once been wrong about a white count. Either you've suddenly become a jealous monster after 40 years of being a decent person, or your training is telling you something true, and your family has made it a crime to listen. Which is more likely?" I didn't answer him that night. I lay awake instead, doing the thing my family had forbidden me to do out loud, running the differential the way I would for any patient whose symptoms didn't add up. That's what a good nurse does. You don't decide what you want to be true and reason backward. You list what you're seeing, and you ask what explains all of it, not just the parts you like. And every benign explanation I reached for failed to cover the facts. Misremembered details? Not this many. Not this consistently. Not always in the direction that kept me away from the truth. A garbled translation through our parents? No. I'd heard some of it from Shannon's own mouth. Genuine illness with an unusual presentation? Then why refuse the nurse sister, the free expert advocate any real patient would beg for? One by one, the kind explanations fell away, and I was left holding the only diagnosis that fit every symptom. And it was monstrous, and it was about my sister, and I did not want it. But something in me shifted that night. Because Tom was right that the timeline made no sense. I hadn't become jealous in April. I was the same person I'd been my whole life, the one who offered to come to the appointments, the one who cried at the diagnosis, the one who built a hopeful folder full of treatment options. The only thing that had changed was that I'd started noticing details that didn't add up, and my family had decided the noticing itself was the sin. So I made myself a quiet promise. I wasn't going to interrogate Shannon. I wasn't going to play detective at the dinner table the way my mother had accused me of. I was going to do one simple, clean thing, the kind of thing any nurse can do, and I was going to do it privately. And if it came back the way I prayed it wouldn't, then I'd know. I was going to make a phone call. Shannon had named the hospital. That was her mistake, though she'd never have seen it as one. All through those months, to make the story solid, she'd named the place she was being treated, a well-known cancer center, the kind of name that makes a family nod gravely and stop asking, because surely no one would lie about that. She'd even, at one point, shown my parents documents, letters, a treatment plan on what looked like official letterhead with the center's logo at the top, which my mother had clutched like a lifeline, and which had silenced the last flickers of doubt in everyone but me. I didn't have those documents, but I knew where they supposedly came from. And I knew something my family didn't because I work in this world. Hospitals have a number you can call now. I need to be careful here because people always ask, and it matters. I could not call a hospital and ask about my sister's medical records. That's private, that's the law, and no nurse would ever risk her license doing it. That is not what I did. What I did was simpler and completely legitimate. My parents had paid huge sums against documents bearing that cancer center's name and logo. So I asked them, carefully, not as an interrogation, but as a daughter trying to help with the finances, if I could see copies of the paperwork, the billing statements, the treatment letters. My mother, still wary of me, let me photograph a few just to look at the insurance side, because the one role I was still allowed to play was the helpful one. Then I called the cancer center's main administrative line. I did not ask about a patient. I said I had documents bearing their letterhead and logo, and I needed to verify whether those documents were authentic, whether they had been issued by their institution. That is a question any organization will answer because it's about them, not about a patient. It's fraud protection. Hospitals very much want to know when their name and logo are showing up on papers they never wrote. The woman I spoke to was quiet for a moment after I read her the details. Then she transferred me to someone in their compliance office. And that person, after I sent over the photographs, called me back 2 days later and confirmed, in careful official language, what some buried part of me had known since the night of the white count comment. The letterhead was not theirs. The logo had been copied. Close, but not their current one. They'd updated it 2 years earlier, and Shannon had pulled an old version off the internet. The physician whose name was signed at the bottom did not work at their institution, and as far as their records showed, never had. The treatment plan used terminology no oncologist at their center would use. The documents my family had emptied their life savings against were forgeries, and not even especially good ones. Good enough to fool grieving parents who wanted desperately to believe, not good enough to fool the institution whose name had been stolen. I remember exactly where I was when the compliance officer told me. I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot, on a break between patients, still in my scrubs. And when she finished, I didn't feel vindicated. I put my forehead on the steering wheel and I cried, the deep, ugly kind, because part of me, a real part right up until that phone call, had still been hoping I was the monster, hoping that I was just jealous and broken and wrong, because that would have meant my sister was really sick and my parents' money was really saving her and my family wasn't a lie. The compliance officer's kind, careful voice took that last hope away. I was not jealous. I was not heartless. I was right. And being right was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. They offered to put it in writing. I said yes, please. And a week later, an envelope arrived from the Cancer Center's compliance office, a formal letter on their real letterhead with their real logo at the top, stating that the documents I'd submitted were not authentic and had not been issued by their institution. That letter became page 1 of the folder. I sat with that letter for a long time before I did anything. I want to be honest about what those days were like, because it wasn't triumph. People imagine the moment you're proven right feels like victory. It doesn't. It feels like grief. Because being right meant my sister was not dying. And being right meant my sister had looked our weeping mother in the eye and taken her retirement. Being right meant the person I'd cried for in April had been performing my family's destruction for 9 months, in real time, while I watched and called myself a monster for flinching. I didn't want to be right. I would have given anything in those days to have been the jealous, heartless creature my family said I was. A jealous sister is a small, fixable problem. What I actually had was so much worse. Once I knew the diagnosis was fake, the rest came easily and quietly, and without any detective work at all, because liars who think no one is allowed to look get careless. I wasn't snooping. The truth was just sitting there, once I knew to let myself see it. There were the social media accounts, not Shannon's main one, where she posted brave updates about her treatment, but the tagged photos, the ones friends posted, the ones she didn't control. A spa weekend, a beach, shopping bags from stores my parents could never afford. In months, she'd told everyone she was too weak to leave the house. There was a credit card statement my mother had shown me herself, fretting over the family finances, not realizing she was handing the nurse a map, charges at resorts and boutiques and restaurants, in cities nowhere near any cancer center, on dates that lined up exactly with treatment trips. There was one photo I keep coming back to. A friend of Shannon's had tagged her at a rooftop bar, drink in hand, tan, and laughing, her hair, the hair the chemo should have taken, long and glossy in the sun. The date stamp was a Saturday in October. I checked it against what I remembered, and then against a text my mother had forwarded the whole family that same weekend. Shannon saying she was too wiped out from Friday's infusion to come to Sunday dinner, send love. Friday's infusion, Saturday on the rooftop, Sunday too sick to see her family. I sat looking at those two things side by side for a long time. It's one thing to know in the abstract that someone is lying. It's another to hold the photograph of the lie in one hand and the text message of the lie in the other, and see how little the liar cared, how lazy the cruelty was, how certain she'd been that no one who loved her would ever check. I didn't have to chase any of it. That's what I want you to understand. I'm not a detective, I'm a nurse. The fraud investigation, such as it was, took one phone call. The rest was just a matter of finally letting my eyes stay open at things they'd been trained by my own family to slide right past. I assembled it into a folder. Page 1, the letter from the cancer center. Behind it, the forged documents Shannon had given my parents, so anyone could compare them side by side. The copied logo next to the real one. Behind that, the photographs, the statements, the text message timeline. A quiet, complete, undeniable picture. I'm a nurse. I think in charts. A chart is just the truth, organized so that anyone can read it, so that the next person who picks it up, even at 3 a.m, even exhausted, even hoping for a different answer, can see at a glance what's actually happening to the patient. I built the chart of my sister's lie the way I'd build any chart. Clearly in order, every finding documented, so the truth would be legible, even to people who had spent 9 months refusing to see it. And then I had to decide what to do with it. I almost didn't do it at the dinner. Tom and I talked about it for 2 weeks. He thought I should go to my parents privately, sit them down, just the 3 of us, show them gently, spare everyone the scene. And part of me wanted that. The part of me that's been the family caretaker my whole life wanted to manage their pain, soften the blow, protect them from the worst version of the truth. But I kept coming back to the wall, the rule, the questions stop. For 9 months, my family had not just believed Shannon, they had actively forbidden the truth from being spoken, had made me the villain for the crime of noticing. And I knew, with the certainty of someone who's watched this family operate for 41 years, exactly what would happen if I did it privately. Shannon would cry. My mother would decide it was somehow still my fault, my jealousy, my cruelty, that I'd attacked my sister with these so-called documents. Shannon would spin it. She'd had 9 months of practice spinning. By the next family dinner, I'd be the sister who forged evidence out of spite against a dying woman. And the wall would close back up, thicker than before. I'd seen her do it with smaller things my whole life. Take a moment where she was plainly in the wrong, and through tears and timing and our parents' bottomless willingness to believe her, walk out of it the victim. She could do it with a broken curfew at 16. She would certainly do it with this. A folder shown to 2 grieving parents in a quiet living room was a folder that could be explained away, reframed, drowned in fresh tears by the time I'd reached my car. The lie had 9 months of momentum and an entire family's emotional investment behind it. I had paper. Paper loses to tears in a small room. The only place paper wins is in the open, where everyone sees the same page at the same moment, and no one can later be quietly told it said something else. The truth had been forbidden in front of everyone, so it had to be spoken in front of everyone. Not for revenge, I want to be clear about that, because it was the only place it would survive. A truth told privately to people committed to a lie just becomes one more thing they get to deny. A truth told in front of the whole family, with the proof sitting open on the table, can't be unseen by all of them at once. The family dinner was at the end of January, at my parents' house. It was, in a grim irony, partly a celebration. Shannon had recently announced she was responding to treatment, that the experimental program seemed to be buying her time, which had occasioned both relief and another round of expenses. 11 of us around the table, my parents, Shannon and her husband, my Aunt Reggie, my husband Tom, a couple of cousins. I brought the folder in my bag. I almost left it in the car twice. My hands were not steady. I want you to know that the woman who sat down at that table was not calm and powerful. She was a 41-year-old big sister who loved her baby sister and was about to do the hardest thing she'd ever done. And who still, even then, even knowing everything, even with the compliance letter in her bag, half hoped someone would prove her wrong. That's the thing about loving someone. The hope is the last thing to die, and it dies hardest of all. If you've ever had to choose between protecting people's feelings and protecting them from a lie, tell me below what you chose. I don't think there's an easy answer, and I'd like to hear yours. It started the way these dinners always started now, with Shannon at the center. She held court, pale and brave, accepting everyone's tender attention, talking about how the treatment was working, how grateful she was for every extra day this family's love had bought her. My mother hovered. My father's eyes were wet with gratitude. And I sat there with a folder in my bag and a stone where my heart should be, listening to my sister describe, in her slightly wrong vocabulary, a recovery as fictional as the disease. I watched her work the table the way I'd watched her my whole life, except now I could see the machinery. The little catch in her voice at exactly the moment that drew the most sympathy. The brave smile deployed right when someone's attention drifted. The way she'd mention a frightening symptom and then, before anyone could ask a clarifying question, the kind of question I was forbidden from asking, wave it away with, "But I don't want to talk about the scary stuff. Tonight's about being together," which sounded like grace and functioned as a wall. She'd built an entire vocabulary of unfalsifiable suffering. You can't fact-check a brave smile. You can't request the medical records of "I just want to focus on the good days." For 9 months, she'd been speaking a language designed to be impossible to question, and the family had mistaken its slipperiness for sanctity. And I understood, watching her that night, that she wasn't even doing it cynically anymore if she ever had been. She'd come to need it. The attention, the centrality, the way a roomful of people organized their entire emotional lives around her. It had become the air she breathed. The lie had stopped being a scheme and become a self. That was the most chilling thing of all and the saddest. My sister wasn't pretending to be dying to get something else. The being attended to was the something else. She'd found the one story that made our family love her the way she'd always, since we were small, needed to be loved. And she was never, ever going to give it up willingly. Then my aunt, Reggie, and I love her for it. She's the one other person in the family who's ever looked at me like I might not be crazy. Said something mild and ordinary. She asked which hospital Shannon was doing the new phase at. Just making conversation, just an aunt being interested. And my mother's head snapped up, and the old rule came down like a gate. "Reggie, we don't pepper Shannon with questions about her treatment. She gets enough of that. This is a family dinner, not an interrogation." And she shot a look at me who hadn't said a word, because the rule had been written with my name on it, and even my aunt's innocent question had somehow become my fault. And something about that, being glared at for a question I didn't even ask, the sheer reflex of it, the way my family's hand moved automatically to shield Shannon and shove me. Something about that steadied me. The stone in my chest went quiet and certain. Shannon saw the look too. And my sister, who has never been able to resist twisting the knife when she's already winning, dabbed at her eyes and said softly, "To the table, but for me, it's okay, Mom." Patty's never believed me. Some people just can't stand to see someone else get love and attention, even when she's dying. "I've made peace with it," the table murmured. My father shook his head at me, disappointed. And Shannon put her face in her hands and began, beautifully, to cry. And my mother flew to her. And over the top of my weeping sister's head, my mother said the words that ended my hesitation forever. "Look what you do to her, Patricia. Look what your jealousy does to your dying sister. Apologize to her." The whole table waited for me to apologize. I reached into my bag. The lie came first, it always does. But this time it came from everyone at once, the whole family's lie, aimed at me. "Apologize, you're heartless, you're jealous. How dare you?" I let it wash over me. I didn't argue. Arguing was the trap I'd been falling into for 41 years. I just took out the folder, and I slid it across the table to Shannon. "I'm not going to apologize," I said quietly, "but I'd like you to open that, and I'd like you to tell everyone what's on the first page." Shannon looked at the folder like it might bite her. "What is this, Patty? What is this?" "Open it." My mother snapped. "She is not going to play your sick little game." But Shannon, rattled, already had it open. Some instinct made her flip the cover, and she saw page 1. She didn't read it. She didn't have time to read it. She saw the logo at the top, the real logo of the cancer center she'd been naming for 9 months, on a letter she'd never seen before, and instantly understood she was never supposed to see. And she shot up out of her chair so fast it toppled over backward and cracked against my parents' floor. "Where did you get that?" she said, and her voice had changed completely. The brave, soft, dying voice was gone. What came out was high and fast and frightened. "You had no right. Where did you get that?" "Sit down, Shannon," I said. "This is a violation. This is..." "Mom, she's been investigating me. She's been spying on a cancer patient." Shannon was backing away from the table now, from the folder, as if distance could undo it. Then my mother, still loyal, still inside the wall, picked up the open folder to defend her daughter, find whatever insult I'd manufactured. And I watched my mother's eyes land on page 1. I watched her read it. I watched the cancer center's letterhead, and the words "not authentic" and "not issued by our institution," and "no record of this physician" go into my mother's eyes and down into a place that had been sealed for 9 months. "I don't understand," my mother said. "Shannon, this says your letters are fake. This is from the hospital. This says they didn't write your letters." She looked up, and her face was the face of someone watching the floor of her life give way. "Shannon, why is the hospital saying they never treated you?" So I gave them the rest, gently, because there were no winners at that table and I knew it. "Turn the page, Mom." She did. "Those are the documents Shannon gave you, the ones you paid against. Compare the logo to the real letter. It's copied. It's even the old version, from before they changed it. The doctor who signed them doesn't exist. Turn. And those are photographs. From the month she told you she was too sick to leave the house. That's a resort. That's a beach. Those are shopping bags. Turn. And that's the credit card statement you showed me yourself, Mom, when you were worried about money. Those charges aren't treatments. They're hotels and boutiques in cities with no cancer center, on the exact dates she told you she was getting infusions. Turn. And that's a photo of her at a rooftop bar the same Saturday she told all of us she was too wiped out from chemo to come to Sunday dinner. Her hair's still long, Mom. 9 months of chemo. Her hair never moved. I didn't say any of it with triumph. I said it the way I'd give a hard report to a family at a bedside. Plainly, without cruelty, letting each fact land at the pace a person can actually absorb something that's breaking them, because that's what was happening. I was breaking my own mother 1 page at a time, and the only mercy I had to offer was to do it clearly, so she'd never have to wonder, never have to be talked back into the lie, never have to go through this again. The silence in that room was the loudest thing I have ever heard, and I have heard a code called over a child. Then Shannon lost control, because there was nothing left to do but lose it. "You don't understand what it's been like," she screamed. And it wasn't grief. It was rage, the pure fury of someone whose long con has collapsed. Do you have any idea what it's like to be the one nobody worries about? To watch everybody. For one time in my life, people actually took care of me. They actually paid attention, and she wheeled on me. You could never stand it, could you? You could never just let me have it. And there it was, in front of everyone. For once, people took care of me. You could never let me have it. Not, I'm sick. Not, there's been a mistake. She had stood up 2 minutes earlier, dying of cancer. And now, undone, she was confessing, screaming, that the whole thing had been about being cared for, being the center, being worried over, that she had invented a terminal illness and emptied her parents' retirement to buy the attention she'd been raised to believe was the most valuable thing a person could have. She'd grown up the precious breakable one, and when adult life stopped automatically treating her that way, she'd manufactured the one thing guaranteed to bring it back. Her husband was staring at her like he'd never seen her. I found out later he hadn't known either, that she'd run the con on him too, that the treatment trips he hadn't been invited on were exactly what they look like. He left that night and didn't go home with her. I won't pretend I felt sorry about that part. I felt sorry for him, a decent man who'd spent 9 months grieving a wife who was, those same 9 months, on a beach. But I didn't feel sorry that the truth reached him. Everyone she'd lied to deserved to stand in the same daylight. My father had not said a word. My father, who had talked about going back to work at 70 to keep his dying daughter comfortable, sat very still and looked at the photographs of his healthy daughter on a beach. And something in his face simply closed, like a shop at the end of a long day. And I understood I was watching a man stop being able to afford a feeling he could not survive. He had given her his retirement. He had offered to give her his remaining working years, and she had spent it on rooftop bars and called him, through our mother, too tired from chemo to come to Sunday dinner. I don't think my father has a word for what that did to him. I'm not sure there is one. My mother was crying now, not the performed weeping the family had done for 9 months, but the real thing, ugly and silent, the weeping of a woman who has just understood she gave away everything she had to a lie, and worse, that the daughter she'd called Heartless for 9 months had been the only one telling her the truth. She kept looking from the folder to Shannon, to me, the folder to Shannon, to me, as if one more pass might rearrange the facts into something bearable. "Patty," she said, "Patty, I called you." She couldn't finish it. "I know what you called me," I said. "Not cruelly, just true. For 9 months. If you've ever been the family member who was punished for being right, who carried a truth alone while everyone called you the problem, like this video and subscribe. There are more of us than anyone wants to admit, and I read every comment. I gathered the folder back up because no one else could bear to touch it, and because some reflex of mine will always be to clean up the family's worst moments. My hands, I noticed, were finally steady. The aftermath has been quieter than the dinner, the way it always is. There was no dramatic courtroom. I want to tell you that honestly because people expect this kind of story to end in handcuffs. Real families mostly don't work that way. My parents, even devastated, could not bring themselves to press charges against their own daughter, to put Shannon, who is still their child, through the criminal system. I understood that, even though a part of me thought she'd earned it. The $200,000 is, realistically, mostly gone. You can't get blood from a lie. Shannon has agreed, on paper, to repay what she can, which will be little and slow, and we all know it. The law was never really going to fix this. The law rarely fixes the things families do to each other. What changed wasn't legal. It was the wall. The wall came down. There was a reckoning of a quieter kind, though. Once the family knew, the treatments stopped, which meant the money stopped, which meant the lifestyle those withdrawals had been funding stopped too. Shannon, it turned out, had not been salting any of it away. She'd been living it month to month, the resorts and the boutiques. So when the spigot closed, there was nothing left and nowhere to hide. Her marriage ended. The friends who'd posted those tagged photos, the ones who'd unknowingly documented the lie, pieced it together once the family stopped covering for her. And her carefully tended image as the brave young woman fighting cancer curdled, in her own circle, into the truth. She didn't need a courtroom to lose everything. She'd built her whole life on a story, and when the story died, so did the life it had been holding up. There's a kind of justice that arrives without a judge. Shannon and I don't speak. She has told the extended family that I humiliated a vulnerable woman, that I'm still, even now, exactly the jealous monster she always said I was. And a few distant relatives, the ones who weren't at the table, the ones who didn't see page 1, still half believe her, because she is very, very good, and because some people would simply rather keep a comfortable story than open a hard folder. I have made my peace with that. You can show people the truth. You cannot make them turn the page. My parents are a different matter. The relationship is wounded in a way that may never fully heal, not between me and them, but inside them, the private injury of people who learned the worst possible thing about a child they adored, and learned at the same time that they'd punish their other child for trying to warn them. My mother called me a few weeks after the dinner. She didn't make excuses. She said, "You knew. You knew for months, and we wouldn't let you say it, and we made you carry it alone. I'm so sorry, Patricia. I'm so sorry for what I called you. It doesn't undo 9 months or 41 years. But I've been a nurse long enough to know that an apology offered too late is still worth more than one never offered at all. And I took it, and we are slowly finding our way to something. My father has barely spoken about it at all. He's of a generation and a temperament that doesn't have words for this kind of wound, and I've stopped waiting for them. But he did something, a month or so after, that said more than words would have. He drove to my house on a Sunday, unannounced, and he'd brought his toolbox, and without much explanation, he fixed the back gate that had been sagging for 2 years, and he tightened the loose railing on my porch, and he cleaned out my gutters. He worked the whole afternoon, and when he was done, he stood in my driveway and he said, "You always were the one who took care of things. I should have noticed somebody needed to take care of you." Then he got in his truck and drove home. My father telling me he was sorry the only way he knew how, by finally at 70 being the one who showed up to fix something for me. The strangest gift in all of it was my Aunt Reggie, who hugged me hard in the driveway after that dinner and said, "I always knew you weren't jealous, honey. I just didn't know how to say it loud enough to matter." It turned out two of us had been quietly disbelieved in that family for years: the strong niece and the aunt who married in and never quite counted. We talk all the time now. There's a particular friendship between two people who were both told for years that what they saw wasn't real, and who finally got to say to each other, "I saw it too. You weren't crazy. Neither was I." People ask if I feel guilty doing it at the table in front of everyone instead of softly. I've thought about it honestly. The way my family spent 9 months refusing to think about anything. I don't. For 9 months, they told me that asking a question was cruelty, that knowing a fact was jealousy, that being a nurse who recognized a lie made me heartless. I didn't do it to humiliate my sister. I did it because the truth had been banned, and the only way to lift a ban is in public, where everyone has to watch you say the forbidden thing out loud. She called me heartless for doubting a dying woman. It turned out there was no dying woman. There was only my sister, who saw a logo on page 1 and stood up before she'd read a single word, because she knew the instant she saw it that the one person in the family trained to know the truth had finally been allowed to say it. I spent my whole life being told that what I knew was just jealousy. It turns out it was the truth, the way it had always been the truth. A white count, a wrong drug name, a logo that didn't belong on the page. The body doesn't lie, and neither, in the end, did the paper. I'd spent 41 years being told my knowing was a character flaw. It was the one thing that finally saved my family from the lie they'd have given everything to keep believing. And the truth, once it's open on the table, doesn't need anyone's permission to be believed.